This is now our third video in the series where I've been talking about not being moved by the things that you see. And in this video, I want to continue addressing some thoughts that I began discussing in our previous video where I was talking about what to do if you find yourself under a storm cloud. Storms are temporary. They are passing. If you're under a storm cloud, it might feel eternal, but storms blow over. They don't come to stay, they come to pass. Whatever storm you're facing is temporary. Whatever affliction you're facing in your life is but for a moment. That's what the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. And I addressed this passage in the previous video, but now I want us to read it together. So let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and I'm going to start in verse 16. And this says, "Therefore, we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory." Now, before I read verse 18, let me quickly comment on verse 17, where the Apostle Paul is talking about his light affliction. Now, if you want to know about some of the things that the Apostle Paul suffered, you can go to another place in Corinthians where he lists some of the afflictions he faced, which included being imprisoned, beaten with rods, beaten with whips, being stoned and left for dead once, being shipwrecked. He went through terrible things, which in natural terms could seem like a very heavy affliction, and yet he called it a light affliction. And I believe the reason he was able to call it a light affliction was twofold. Number one, it was precisely because of what he wrote here, that it's temporary, it's passing. But number two, he was comparing his affliction to the eternal weight of glory which he was going to enjoy with Christ forever and ever. He said in another place, "I reckon the sufferings of this life are not even worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." So if you consider the things that you're facing in this life compared to the glory of eternity, it's not a big deal. It's a light affliction in relative terms. So that's what the Apostle Paul is talking about here. Now let's read on in verse 18. He says, "While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal." Now think about what he's saying here, that we do not look at what is seen. Now how does that work? By definition, something that you can look at is something that is seen. How can you look at something that is not seen? Well, to understand this, we can go back to our illustration of the storm clouds. If you're under a storm cloud, your physical eyes cannot see what is beyond that cloud. And yet, in your heart, you know that there is a higher reality. And even though you can't physically see beyond the storm clouds, you can look beyond that storm cloud with the eyes of your heart, knowing that there's a higher reality and the storm cloud will blow over. My wife wrote an article about this on our ministry website, javareg.net. The article is called "Beyond the Clouds," and I'm going to post a link to that article in the description of this video if you want to go read the article. It's beautifully written. My wife and I have both had the experience of flying in inclement weather, so we know what it's like to take off and be under a storm cloud, and everything looks dreary and gray, but the moment you pass that cloud barrier, there may be a little bit of turbulence in the process, but as soon as you clear that cloud barrier, you see a beautiful blue sky and the sun shining, and you get to see the higher reality above the storm cloud. Now, when you're under a storm cloud, you don't get that perspective. But in your heart, you know that there's a higher reality, and you can choose to look beyond the cloud. Even though your eyes can't see it, your heart can look beyond what is seen, knowing that what is seen is just for a moment. Let me tell you a story about something that happened a couple years ago. In the summer, my wife and I went to India. We went to the state of Tamil Nadu, and we went to a city called Kanyakumari. It's a beautiful city. It's right on the southern tip of the Indian subcontinent. It's a place where three oceans converge, and tourists go there from all over India and all over the world. And From the same vantage point, you can see, because it's on the southern tip of the subcontinent, you can see the sunset, and then from the same vantage point in the morning, you can see the sun rise. And so again, tourists come from all over the world to see where these three oceans converge. It's a beautiful city, and so my wife and I happened to be there with a friend of ours named Ashwanti, and she told us that the sunrise is something we just could not miss. And she said, we need to make sure we wake up early enough to go see the sunrise. You go stand on the shore and look at the sunrise. You just don't want to miss it. I'm not a morning person. I like being up once I'm up and I've had my first cup of coffee. But getting to that point is a very difficult process for me. I just don't like waking up that early in the morning. But that's not something you can do every day to see the sunrise in Kanyakumari. So we agreed, we said, all right, we'll do it. So we set our alarm for, I think it was before 5 in the morning. We got up. I was struggling to wake up. We went, we had our coffee. My wife is a morning person, and it seems that Ashwanti she's also a morning person, apparently, at least she was that day. And so my wife and Ashwanti were wide awake, just having a great time talking. But I was still trying to wake up. We had our coffee. We went to the shore, and we stood there and we looked up to watch the sunrise. So we looked up and we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and we saw absolutely nothing. There was a cloud covering that was blocking our view of the sunrise, and we didn't even see a single ray of sunlight. And I was standing up there looking up at the sky as if there was something to see, even though there was nothing to see. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I could have stayed asleep. Of course, I wasn't complaining. I enjoyed, we had a great time with our friend there, but I was thinking, I could have been sleeping right now. But our friend, she said, don't worry, we can try again tomorrow. Just as positive and optimistic as she could be. And I wasn't necessarily keen on the idea of waking up early again the next day, but we agreed to do it. So we woke up just as early, if not earlier, the next day, had our coffee, and then went to the shore. We looked up and we stood there. There was a lot of other tourists there, other people from other parts of India and other parts of the world standing there to watch this sunrise. And we stood there and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. Now, if there were clouds the first day, if on the first day the sunrise was covered by clouds, on the second day, even the clouds were covered by clouds. There was more clouds the second day than there had been the first day. And we saw absolutely nothing. Both mornings we were in Kanyakumari. The next day we were in another city, so we didn't get to try it a third time. And I slept in the next day after that. But we never did see that sunrise. And I remember standing out there on that second morning, looking up at the sky and thinking about how I could have stayed asleep. And then I heard the Lord speak to me, and the Lord said, was there a sunrise this morning? And I thought, well, that's a trick question. Yes, there was a sunrise, but I didn't get to see it. I never saw a sunrise. And the Lord said, I didn't ask you if you saw a sunrise. I'm asking you if there was a sunrise this morning. And of course, the answer is yes. And then the Lord spoke to me and said, people would think you're a fool if you tried to convince people that there was not a sunrise this morning because you didn't see any evidence of it. That because you saw no evidence of the sunrise, there must not have been a sunrise. People would think you're a fool. Because of course there's a sunrise, regardless of what you see. Even if all you can see are clouds, you know that beyond those clouds, there is a sunrise. You didn't get to see the beauty of it, okay, but there was a sunrise. And that's what the Lord spoke to me. And I started realizing there are days where all we will see are clouds. But beyond those clouds, there is a higher reality, and God is working in our favor. The faithfulness of God has not failed us. And I got to thinking about Joseph in the Old Testament, who was sold into slavery in Egypt. When he was 17 years old, he had 2 dreams from God. And then 13 years went by where things appeared to go from bad to worse for him. It looked like every step he was taking him further away from the fulfillment of his dreams. He winds up in Egypt as a prisoner, or first as a slave and then a prisoner. And it looks like things are going from bad to worse. And for 13 years, all Joseph could see were clouds. He saw no shred of evidence of the faithfulness of God, yet he continued to believe. And while it appeared that he was going further and further away from the fulfillment of his dreams with every step. In reality, every step was actually taking him closer to the fulfillment of his dreams, because he had to be in Egypt. He had to be near Potiphar, to be put into the king's prison, to have access to Pharaoh. So all of these things had to happen, and God was actually positioning Joseph for his promotion, for the fulfillment of his dreams. But as it appeared for 13 years, all he could see were clouds, and it looked like he was getting further and further away from the fulfillment of his dreams, when in fact he was getting closer. You cannot be moved by how things appear, by what you see. You've got to look beyond the clouds that you see and trust that there's a higher reality. You've got to see the unseen. Look beyond the clouds. Look at what you cannot see. This principle shows up again in Hebrews chapter 11, talking about Moses. I believe it's Hebrews 11 around verse 27, where it says, "By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible." When you can look at that which is invisible, when you can see the unseen, you can endure any temporary affliction, any passing storm cloud. Don't look at the clouds that you can see. With the eyes of your heart, look beyond what you can see with your eyes. Look beyond those storm clouds, and you can endure anything that is temporary. I hope that blesses your heart. There's more for us to cover in this series, so I believe you're blessed, and I will see you in the next video.